There's something I've always found a little bit awkward about being a music fan. And that is, that moment when you discover a band early on in your time and you love them and they feel like they're yours, right? And then they blow up. And suddenly, that live demo album that you were like listening to at 2 o'clock in the morning in your car by yourself, and it was just like singing the feelings of your soul, you hear it in like a Target commercial. And you're like, what is going on here? And then those people that you tried to introduce the band to like 6 months prior but weren't really into it, then after they blew up, everybody's like, oh yeah, that's my favorite band too. I had a friend in college who took this very seriously. Anytime a band crossed over, he was done. It was like he was really into Radiohead, like earlier Radiohead before Pablo Honey. And then when Creep became this massive radio hit, he felt like Tom York had betrayed him personally. It's like, why did you become something that more people could love? And I always thought that sounded a little bit dramatic, but I also kind of get it because Jesus is my favorite thing. And there's a couple times a year when he's got mad crossover appeal. And Easter is one of those occasions. And so I look out on this room and I am genuinely glad that everyone is here. I really am. But I'm also aware that for some of you, it feels a little bit like you've been dragged out to a concert by somebody. You're hoping that this guy on stage is just going to stick to the greatest hits, right? And you're dressed beautifully, and you're on your way to brunch afterwards. And I'm going to interrupt those plans by talking about an itinerant Jewish rabbi who was murdered on a Roman cross on a Friday, was crucified, dead, and buried, and then came out of his own tomb 3 days later. And I'm going to tell you that that story is the most important thing that has ever happened, not just in history, but in the life that you are trying to hold together. And some of you are like, dude, just get the band back up here. They're great. And if that's you, well, welcome to All Souls. I'm genuinely glad you are here today or any Sunday. But you should know that you're surrounded by people whose lives have been completely rearranged by that first Easter morning. They have gone deep on the B-sides. They've got the first run concert t-shirts on this. They are people who have built everything on the idea that the man on the cross was not just a teacher, but was actually God in person who came for us, who died and rose and defeated death, who makes sense of everything that we long for most. And if that's you, happy Easter. He is risen. But there is one thing that I want to say to everyone in this room, convinced, skeptical, everyone in between. I don't think that the problem with Easter is that it demands too much of your intellect. I think the problem with Easter is that it demands too much of your imagination. Because the claim of resurrection is not just strange, it is inconvenient. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, then the whole world is no longer closed. It means that death is not ultimate. It means that the world is a fundamentally different place than we thought. It means that something can be made out of broken things. It means that the conditions that we have been given, the limitations, the loss, the chaos, and the confusion, those are not the final word. On January 24th, 1975, Keith Jarrett arrived at the Opera House in Cologne, Germany to play a solo concert. He's one of the most celebrated jazz pianists that has ever lived, and nothing about that night went according to plan. The promoter was this remarkable 18-year-old woman named Vera Brandis. She had organized the whole event, but there were a series of miscommunications and timing cues that went wrong, and the wrong piano ended up being rolled onto the stage. Instead of the Bösendorfer 290 Imperial Concert Grand piano that he had requested, the stage crew brought in this small, out-of-tune, beat-up practice piano. It was tinny in the upper register. It was weak in the bass. The pedals did not work. So Jarrett initially said, forget this. No, I'm leaving. He had driven through the night. He was exhausted. He was suffering from back pain that was severe enough to where he had to wear a brace to sleep at night. And he'd arrived, and the concert was at 11:30 at night. The instrument was wrong. The conditions were wrong. He wanted to walk away. But Vera's Brandis, she pleaded with him. She's like, no, look, the concert's sold out. The recording equipment is already set up. It's ready to go. And so he sat down at the broken piano, and he began to play. And if you listen to the recording, which I encourage you to do, you will hear something that should not be possible. You can hear the artist working around the weak keys. You can hear him emphasizing the middle register. You can hear him playing harder on the bass to compensate, stomping almost percussively on the damper pedal to try to force resonance out of an instrument that could not offer it. And there's this moment in the recording, you can hear Jarrett humming, vocalizing, almost groaning as he plays, as though his whole body is involved in the act of making beauty out of broken chords. And the Colon Concert went on to become the best-selling solo piano album in history. How is that? I mean, is it because we're just suckers for a story about people who were able to make the best out of a bad situation? I mean, was Jarrett's performance just this singular moment of resigned professionalism, disconnected from any significant pattern in the world, or is there something else going on there? Was it revealing something true about the world? Is it possible that what was happening in the Cologne Opera House was less about coping and more about creating, that the limitations themselves became the conditions for something that could not have existed any other way? What if the disruption becomes the doorway? What if the breaking has to precede the making new? I mean, if that's true of a broken piano, can it also be true of a broken world? Can it also be true of our broken lives? I mean, is that just wishful thinking, or is it something more enduring, something like hope? A sound that fixes the imagination on a different possibility, one more real, one more beautiful than the circumstances that produced it. So whether we are looking at the pain and the chaos of our cultural moment or the limitations of our own lives, often we feel like the wrong instrument has been put on the stage. This is not what we asked for. These are not the circumstances we wanted. And the question, the one that Paul is addressing in Romans chapter 8, is whether it is possible to make something true and beautiful out of the broken world in front of us. And the sound of that beauty has a word in Paul's vocabulary: groaning. And he's not being pessimistic, he's being precise. Groaning is what faith sounds like when it has not yet become sight. It's what beauty sounds like when it first has to pass through pain. And that's what resurrection tells us about our world. There are at least two stories being told right now about the state of the world. The first says that things have never been worse. You don't have to look hard for evidence. Apparently, you just have to do a Google search, like Kevin. Wars with no clear end. A political culture so saturated with contempt that rage has become the ambient noise of our lives. And beneath those headlines, something quieter. The former U.S. Surgeon General has declared loneliness a public health crisis, warning that social isolation carries the health impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. But it's way less fun. Anxiety and depression in young people remain at historic highs. Trust in every institution, government, media, church, medicine continues to erode. In fact, Gallup just released a survey last week tracking how Americans rate their future lives, a question they've been asking for nearly 25 years straight. In 2025, optimism about the future has reached its lowest point ever recorded. Since 2020, an estimated 24.5 million fewer Americans feel hopeful about what is ahead in the world. So that's story one. Everything's fallen apart. But there's another story, and it's that by every measurable standard, things have never been better. Hunger, sanitation, literacy, child mortality, extreme poverty, across much of the world, those things have improved dramatically. In fact, in just the last 2 decades, global poverty has been cut in half. Hans Rosling was a researcher who spent years documenting this progress, and he argued that as a whole, the world is genuinely improving. And yet, whenever he asks audiences about this, almost everyone assumed that things were getting worse, which tells you that statistics alone will not settle the deeper question of our souls. We might be living longer and healthier, but do we know how to live with ourselves? You see, both stories have data behind them, but neither one feels like it's the whole truth. Because, yes, the outer world, by all kinds of metrics, is improving, but the inner world, that one of meaning and belonging and purpose, that one is in crisis. Dr. King put it best in a sermon not far from here. He said, our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men. I mean, our culture has endlessly optimized for the how, but it has almost nothing to say about the why. Which is to say, we have better tools, more luxuries than any generation ever before us. I mean, have you tried the brown sugar and rosemary oat milk latte from Dancing Goats? It is like the best $17 you will ever spend on a cup of coffee. It's $8, but come on, Yuli, give me a break. You have more of everything but happiness. We are on stage with the wrong piano, and we just don't know how to play it. Enter the Apostle Paul. Writing from prison, he has something to say about both of these stories. He refuses despair, but he also refuses naive optimism, because he anchors hope somewhere else entirely, in a new world that is already breaking in. Romans chapter 8, beginning at verse 18. He writes this: I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. For who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes with us through wordless groans. The word of the Lord. Now, to understand what Paul is getting at here, you got to get through a little bit of a backstory. Before Paul became a follower of Jesus, he was a Jewish rabbi. And like most of the rabbis in his day, he divided history into two ages. This present age. This is the world as it is, the world of war and marked by suffering and injustice and the grinding weight of human failure, natural catastrophe. And then there's also the age to come, the world as it will be, the world when God's reign, fullness steps into history and sets everything right. There will be no more poverty, no more racism, no more war, no more sexism, no more tribalism wielded as a weapon. And the Hebrew vision of the world was not escape from the world, but the world itself renewed, the broken instrument restored. And between those two ages was the day of the Lord, not seen as a day of cosmic terror as we tend to imagine it, but a moment of liberation for the oppressed, for the suffering. This is the moment that you wait for. But the resurrection of Jesus completely blew this framework out of the water. You see, the rabbis expected resurrection at the end of history and all of humanity being raised together when the age to come finally arrived. But instead, what happened was that one man was raised from the dead right in the middle of history, not at the end, not after everything is resolved, right in the middle of the mess. There's this point in every good story where there's this kind of sudden good turn, when everything looks like it is going hopelessly out of sorts. And then this good thing happens, and it pierces your soul with a joy that brings tears. That moment that you thought was the end turns out just to be the beginning. Well, Paul is saying that Easter is the greatest turn in the history of the world. His conclusion, the resurrection of Jesus is what pulled the future into the present, which means we now live in the overlap of these two ages. Another world is dying, but a new one is being born. And he felt that experience of living in the overlap, and he has a word for it: groaning. He uses that word 3 times in this short passage. He says the whole creation is groaning. We ourselves are groaning. Even the Spirit of God is groaning. It's a word that describes labor pain, the ache of something that is almost here but is not here yet. But it's just as important to note what he does not say. He does not say, stop groaning. Everything's better than ever. Nor does he say keep groaning because it's all going to hell in a handbasket. No, he says you are groaning the way that a woman in labor groans, which is a whole nother thing. Because labor is not the same thing as grief. See, grief looks backwards. It mourns what has been lost. But labor looks forward. It anticipates what is coming. The groan of despair fears that nothing can ever change. The groan of labor knows something new is being born. And so Paul is telling this community between the painful reality of the present and the joyful promise of the future, yes, the frustration you feel, the weight of living in a world that is not what it should be, that is not a sign that the story is ending. That is the sound of the story turning. Keith Jarrett at that broken piano was groaning. You can hear it on the recording, his whole body involved in the act of making something beautiful out of what he had been given. That groan was not despair, it was new creation. And if you are here today and you're groaning over your marriage, over your child, over the loss of work, over a country that you feel is unrecognizable, over a world where news arrives each morning like another blow to be absorbed, Paul is saying, yeah, that is the right response. That is not a failure of your faith. That is just honesty about the human condition. But the question is, what kind of groaning is it? See, because groaning without hope becomes despair or rage or the exhausted numbness of someone who has stopped believing that anything good can be born. But groaning with hope, it's something else entirely. That's the sound of someone who knows what is being born and refuses to stop waiting for it. Which for Paul makes Easter both a joyful thing and a really uncomfortable thing to hear. Because he says that the whole problem with the world is not this political party or that one, not this administration or the next, not the geopolitical crises of the moment. All of those things are real. But the main problem, Paul says, is what he calls the flesh. That unchosen part of us that reaches for what harms us, that defaults to contempt, that treats people as either instruments of their joy or of an obstacle to their joy. And I know that part of myself all too well. The broken politics, the tribal rage, the pain of your life, the wars that seem to have no end, those are just the symptoms, but the disease is the human heart. And we prefer to locate the problems outside of ourselves, the other side, the other country, the other person, the one who doesn't understand. But the pain and the disconnect there, they just run right through us. You see, the renewal of all things begins with the renewal of the human condition. The transformation of our world begins with the transformation of our hearts. We need to be changed by something outside of ourselves, not a better algorithm or better public policy or better drugs, as good as all of those things are, and not the better version of ourselves that we life hack or bootstrap into existence. You see, the healing of the world and the healing of our hearts is about a person. And Easter is the startling claim that Jesus of Nazareth was not just a wise rabbi or a misguided mystic. No, it is the claim that in Jesus, God came into our flesh, not just to experience it, but to transform it. And that his death and his burial and his resurrection, they're not symbols or metaphors for the inevitability of new life, but they are the first fruit of a new creation, the hinge upon which your story and my story and every story turns. In her book on the meaning of Easter, the priest Fleming Rutledge puts it like this: the resurrection is not an epilogue to the story of Jesus. It is the beginning of God's new creation. Which is exactly why Paul can talk about glory right in the middle of the groaning, because resurrection means that the future is already pressing into the present, giving us a new way of being human. That is the offer on the table. It's not just a destination after you die. It is a new way of being human here, now, right in the middle of the groaning. And that's why even with broken keys and circumstances that no one would choose, the sound of hope can rise. And Paul is very specific about what hope is. He says, hope that is seen is no hope at all. For who hopes for what they already have? What he's getting at is that hope, by definition, is oriented towards something that has not yet arrived. It is not optimism. It is not positive self-talk. It is not a feeling. I love how the historian Kate Bowler puts it. Optimism promises that things will all work out. But we know the truth, sometimes they don't. Hope, on the other hand, isn't embarrassed by reality. It knows the world is unfinished, unjust, fragile, and still it insists God is not done yet. You see, hope is the conviction that the story isn't over. So Easter, it doesn't invite us to optimism, but it does invite us to hope. Not because everything is fine, but because God is faithful. The one who raised Jesus from the dead is still at work. The groaning has a direction. Paul says it's like first fruits, the first buds of spring that appear before the harvest comes. They're not the harvest itself, but they are the sign of what's coming. They are the evidence that what is coming is on the way. And Jesus' resurrection is the first fruit, the sign of a harvest that has not yet arrived, but is now inevitable. And Paul wants us to see that we are not waiting passively. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is already at work in the world, already at work in us. Every act of justice, every act of mercy, every time where someone chooses to stay at the broken piano and make something beautiful anyway. Those moments are not just nice things that happened. They're the signs of what's coming. They're the first fruits. The groaning has a direction. The labor has an end. The story isn't over. I mean, Jared didn't get the piano he wanted. He got the one that was there. And the question that he had to answer, the one that determines everything, is whether he was going to stay and play something beautiful anyway. But long before he sat down with a broken instrument, God had already done it. Because in Jesus, he entered into the full groaning of a broken world, and not from a safe distance, not as a spectator, but all the way down into the suffering, into the shame, into the isolation of Holy Saturday. And from that broken instrument, from that cross, he drew the only music that could ever set the world right. And Paul is asking us, how do we respond to that? Not whether or not the world is burning, not whether or not everything is actually fine, but whether we will take God's lead and play the instrument that we have been given, this broken, beautiful, not yet redeemed world, as a people who know that something new is being born in it. As a people who groan, yes, but as a people who groan with hope. And that means that Easter is not just a question about whether or not you believe in the resurrection. It's a question about whether or not you're going to dare to live it. Ronald Rolheiser puts it like this: the resurrection tells us it's never too late. Every so often we will be surprised. We must believe that the stone will be rolled back, and we must be ready to poke out our timid heads, take off the linen bindings of death, and walk free for a time, breathing resurrection air. You see, friends, our hope is not that ideal conditions will arise. It's that every so often we can take our first timid steps toward this new world that is being born. That is the meaning of Jesus' resurrection. That a new world is kicking down the door. It is set into motion one world, the birth of a new one. And somehow all of these pains and all of these longings, these frustrations, they are real, but they are the groans of a woman in labor, and the labor gives birth to joy. We groan in grief not over the past, but in hope for the future, wrapped up in a God who has already set all things right. And so we can take our part of the story as a people of the future right here in the present. And a day is coming, and by God's Spirit it is already here, when sin and death have been conquered, and the guilt and the shame that we carry has been wiped away, when these bodies that ache and groan, these souls that cannot bear the weight of longing, they too will be redeemed and made new. That the eclipse of this age with the one that is coming is the last word on everything. And so Easter is an invitation to keep hope alive. You keep it alive in your pain and in your suffering and in your groaning, in your marriage, in your singleness, in your family, in your friends, in your job or in your search, in your home or in your school, in your strength, in your weakness, in your faith and in your doubt, in your clarity and your confusion, in your growth and in your guilt. And until then, you hold on to Jesus. Because Easter is the promise that nothing's going to keep him from holding on to you. Not even death. Let us pray. God, we come to this table as people who long for a world that is made new. God, you know what we're carrying, and you intercede with wordless groans. over all the things we can't name. And we're not here because we think we can hold it together, but because we know that you do. And so meet us here in our hope and in our grief, in our anticipation and our uncertainty, in the confidence that you are not done with this world or our lives yet. And we come in the name of the one who has conquered death, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.